Welcome back to The Heat. I'm Nathan King, filling in for Anna Naidu. We are talking about who the next United Nations Secretary-General may be when Ban Ki-moon steps down later this year. Let's bring back in our panel. I want to go to Shazia Rafi in New York. You know, we talked about who might be the next UN Secretary-General, but what qualities does whoever it's going to be need to have, given the crises that are facing the world? People have been very critical over the UN, over inaction, inability to solve the Syrian crisis. There are others as well. South Sudan, the world's newest nation, tearing itself apart. What do they need to be? They need to be a secretary, a general, more, what?
Well, I think as one who's held that title, even though of albeit a very small organization, you need to be able to be both, and you need to be able to judge when you need to be both. So to some extent, you know, with some members of the P5, you occasionally need to step back and be secretary, and with the rest of the world and the institution itself, you need to be a general. But I think women are, and I would definitely want to just come back to one point from the last round, which is that we are the UN is an institution where global treaties are negotiated. One of the most interesting treaties and conventions is the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. The majority of the Security Council, including 4 of the P5, are ratifiers of that convention. So they have an obligation in their choices to ensure that their choices and their policies are meeting that convention. And even the United States, which hasn't signed and which hasn't ratified that convention, still has very strong national laws on affirmative action, which include gender. If you see President Obama's appointments to the Supreme Court, they reflect that. So one of the keys here is that we do know, and it's not a matter of if they are equally qualified. They are all equally qualified, the men and the women. And in this context, after, 20 years after Beijing, and China was the one that hosted Beijing, it is important for there to be a woman. And that also answers the question of what that Secretary General will do. We are looking for a world where there will be peace, where conflict will be prevented, where tolerance will be built, where diverse societies will be built, where accountability will be built. Right. And these are qualities that most of these women candidates will bring to the table. Certainly the men will too, but given that this is where we are at after 8 Secretary Generals who've been men who have not been able to prevent these crises and these conflicts, it's time to give the chance to a woman.
Raghida, what qualities does the new Secretary General need? Syria, very close to your heart. You're talking to us from Beirut, a burgeoning refugee crisis that shows no signs of ending, but also all other problems too.
Look, I have a problem with the Secretary-General who says that he is the servant of the Security Council. The point is that there has been a separation of powers, if you will, as far as the Constitution of the United Nations is concerned. That is to say that it's supposed to be parallel powers, not a servant of. Ban Ki-moon was not the first one to say, well, it's up to the Security Council and I follow. Before him, I think the word servant of the Security Council was used by Kofi Annan, and I'm sure others before him acted as such. The one who tried to challenge one member of the Security Council, Boutros Ghali, lasted for only one term. He never made it to the second term, and I think he was the only one who didn't make it to the second term. So it's a very big problem of the relationship between the Security Council and the Secretary-General of the United Nations. Now, personally, I'd like a strong one. Personally, I'd like a leader to be in this difficult time, holding the process and directing and using his authorities, because the Secretary-General has the authority, for example, to convene the Security Council should the Security Council refuse to convene on an important, very important matter.
You're talking about Article 99.
Manager is exactly. So what would the permanent members, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, particularly the Russians and the Americans and the Chinese, want? Well, they would want a manager. They don't want someone who is a big leader who's going to challenge them and say, I am the Secretary General and I will take the higher moral authority to put on, to put forward should be put forward, whether it's regarding Syria or not. I'll just make quick, if you allow me, just a quick moment.
And then to Vladimir,
I said to the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon the other day, that couple of years ago, I said to him, you have one legacy to make, one legacy to have, and that is ending impunity. That is the one legacy you could have. And he agreed then. But the point is that that is not going to be his legacy, because there is no ending of impunity. The tragedies that are taking place right now are tremendous. You know, they are a shame on the United Nations as a Security Council, as a Secretariat, as every, except maybe in some, organizations that are held in helping the refugees and etc.
Vladimir, I want to go to you. Raghida raised some interesting points in terms of who the Secretary-General has to be. And she basically said that the great powers, US, Russia and others, including China, don't want a general or a secretary. They want essentially a manager. Is that something that you think is inevitable in this process?
Well, nothing is inevitable. I was thinking about, say, it might be an interesting or strange comparison, but I was thinking about Vatican, very big organization, Catholic Church, and, behold to many powers, but yet we have currently a Pope which is very kind of modernizing and has a vision and is able to challenge this, 1,000-year-old institution. So things, we can get a very strong, assertive person. I agree with a previous speaker that it's somebody who has to stand up to Security Council with his vision, with his moral weight, moral authority, and more or less directed toward world peace. That's what a regional organization. And the world peace, of course, involves equality of all races, of all genders, and everything. But somebody who is not, so for me, what's important is somebody who knows the laws and respects them, somebody who is a good diplomat, and somebody with moral authority to sort of chart its way through the designs, and political agendas.
Vladimir, that was a very good answer, I think, because it basically sets up what people are expecting. But I've traveled with both Secretary-Generals. I used to cover the UN like Raghida does, previous ones, Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan. And even though they were completely different men, I can tell you that behind the scenes, their frustrations were exactly the same about the system and the way global governance works. So I want to bring in Shazia here and say, is it not the Secretary-General that's the problem, but the actual institution of the UN?
Well, I mean, this is an institution which is an intergovernmental organization, which means member governments have to be persuaded. And often, since I worked on getting treaties agreed at the UN, they have to be persuaded by consensus, which is extremely difficult. We had to do that with the International Criminal Court Treaty as well as with the Arms Trade Treaty. But it is possible to do so if you have somebody who is strong on the power of persuasion. And I think that is what one is looking for, is that you want people with strong convictions who are going to be able to persuade others to join them on that path. And I think consensus building is one of the key skills that women bring to the table. So I understand the previous speakers keep saying he when they're referring to the Secretary-General, but we are down the road to possibly seeing she. So I would respectfully request that each person, pay attention to that when they're talking about the job.
Well, when it's she, we say that about potentially the US president as well at the moment, don't we? When it is she, Raghida, what sort of qualities do you think they need, and what do you think they, and this is the last word, and what do you think they need to do to reshape the UN to make it more relevant?
I think she needs to dare. I think any Secretary-General who's going to lie low and say, well, it's none of my business, I'll hide behind the Security Council, we don't need him or her to take this organization into the right direction. We have too many tragedies in the world. We need her to lead with courage and with the intention to say, I dare to be fair.
Well, she or he will probably be known in the next couple of months. Raghida Dergham from Beirut, thanks so much. And also Shazia Rafi from New York, really appreciate it. And Vladimir Golstein as well from Rhode Island. Fascinating discussion.